Here is a truth most people are not ready to hear. The men women treat the worst are often the men they want the most. Not the ones they feel nothing for, not the ones they could lose without consequence, but the men who matter. The men who represent real possibility. When a man has no emotional weight, he is given patience, understanding, freedom. When a man carries potential, he is given pressure tests, consequences. This is not romance. This is not intuition. This is psychology operating beneath awareness. The more a woman invests emotionally, the more her behavior shifts. What once felt light becomes heavy. What once felt safe becomes monitored. What once felt natural turns conditional. And slowly, without realizing it, she begins punishing the very man she hopes will stay. Most relationships do not collapse because of betrayal or incompatibility. They collapse because unconscious fear disguises itself as care. Today, I'm going to break down this pattern calmly, clearly, and without comfort language. Because if you don't recognize it, you will repeat it. And you will keep losing the same type of man for the same invisible reasons. Before we begin, leave a comment with your location and local time. And if this kind of psychological clarity matters to you, consider subscribing. To understand how this pattern begins, I want to slow it down to something simple and familiar. I picture two men in my life. The first is someone I'm mildly interested in. He's fine, pleasant, easy to be around. If he disappears tomorrow, my life stays intact. I don't build stories around him. I don't project a future onto him. He exists in the present, and that makes him safe. The second man is different. He stands out. He's intelligent, grounded, capable. He carries momentum. I can see a future forming before it's even discussed. And because of that, he carries weight. Emotional weight. Now here's the question most people avoid answering honestly. Which man gets more patience when he takes hours to respond to a text? Which man gets the benefit of the doubt when plans change at the last minute? Which man am I calmer with when something doesn't go the way I expected? It's never the one I care about most. The man I'm only loosely interested in gets grace. He gets flexibility. He gets emotional neutrality. His behavior doesn't register as a threat because there's nothing at stake. I'm not afraid of losing him because I'm not attached to what he represents. The man I actually want gets scrutiny. His response time starts to feel meaningful. His choices begin to feel personal. His availability starts to affect my mood. This isn't cruelty. It's not malice. And it's not a character flaw. It's a predictable psychological shift that happens the moment emotional investment enters the picture. When I'm not invested, my nervous system stays calm. His actions don't trigger stories in my head. I don't search for hidden meanings. I don't assign long-term consequences to short-term behavior. I remain easy to be around because nothing feels like it could be lost. But when I become invested, my perception changes. Now every delay has the potential to mean disinterest. Every canceled plan threatens the future I've already imagined. Every moment of distance feels like a warning sign. I'm no longer reacting to the man in front of me. I'm reacting to the future I've built in my mind around him. This is where the investment paradox begins. The more I want something to work, the more pressure I apply to it. The more potential I see, the more I try to secure it. And the more I try to secure it, the more my behavior shifts in ways that quietly undermine everything. I don't notice it at first. I tell myself I'm just being attentive, that I'm communicating needs, that I'm protecting myself. But attention turns into monitoring. Communication turns into evaluation. Self-protection turns into control. The man who once felt relaxed in my presence now feels observed. This shift is subtle, but men feel it immediately. High-value men especially. Men with options experience and self-respect recognize when the emotional cost of being with someone starts increasing without their consent. They notice when interactions begin to feel heavier, when conversations stop being restorative and start feeling like assessments. And here's the part that's uncomfortable to admit. The man who attracted me in the first place was not drawn to my expectations. He was drawn to my ease. He was drawn to the version of me that laughed without tension, that enjoyed his company without measuring it, that didn't need him to perform to feel secure. That version of me disappears as my investment increases. I become more demanding where I was once flexible, more critical where I was once appreciative, more anxious where I was once confident. Not because he changed, because I did. And the reason I changed wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of losing something valuable. Fear of being wrong about my judgment. Fear of investing in a future that might not materialize. So I start trying to manage outcomes instead of experiencing the relationship. I watch his behavior more closely. I mentally score interactions. I track patterns, consistency, effort. From my perspective, this feels responsible. Mature even. From his perspective, it feels like pressure. Pressure he didn't agree to. Pressure that wasn't there at the beginning. Pressure that makes being with me less enjoyable the more he matters. This is the core of the investment paradox. When someone matters less, I treat them better. When someone matters more, I make it harder to be with me. And this paradox doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't show up as obvious sabotage. It shows up in tone shifts, in expectations that aren't spoken, in reactions that feel disproportionate to the situation. A delayed text becomes an issue. A busy week becomes emotional distance. A need for space becomes a threat. The relationship stops being a place of relief and starts becoming a place of responsibility. Men don't pull away because they don't care. They pull away because caring begins to cost too much. Especially men who have built lives they enjoy. Men who are accustomed to peace. Men who don't need chaos to feel alive. They notice when their presence is no longer enough, when their effort is assumed instead of appreciated, when their autonomy is quietly reframed as a problem. And they don't usually argue about it. They disengage. This is why so many women feel blindsided when high-value men disappear. From her perspective, she was more invested, more attentive, more serious. From his perspective, the relationship crossed an invisible threshold where effort stopped feeling voluntary and started feeling enforced. He didn't leave because she wanted him. He left because wanting him changed how she treated him. The tragedy is that none of this is intentional. Most women don't wake up and decide to become demanding or critical. The behavior emerges naturally from emotional attachment combined with fear. It feels justified in the moment, rational even. But attraction doesn't respond to justification. It responds to experience. And the experience of being with someone who monitors you more the closer you get is not a desirable one. The investment paradox ensures that the man you care about most receives the most pressure, the least grace, and the highest emotional tax. And unless this pattern is seen clearly, it repeats. Every time a man feels significant, the same shift occurs. Every time potential appears, behavior tightens. Every time something real forms, fear enters and rewrites the dynamic. This is not about being better or worse as a person. It's about understanding that emotional investment, when unmanaged, quietly turns into behavior that pushes away exactly what it's trying to secure. Ketusk fan hai tieptuk yu Ko vietju motken kin jen motken kin hai trum tu theo qui jin fan ba. Once emotional investment takes hold, the change doesn't arrive dramatically. It arrives quietly, almost invisibly, disguised as care. At first, I don't feel different. I still believe I'm the same person, still calm, still reasonable, still myself. But the way I relate to him begins to shift in ways that are hard to notice from the inside. When I wasn't invested, time felt neutral. When I am invested, time feels loaded. A few hours without a reply used to mean nothing. Now it carries weight. Not because the delay itself matters, but because of what I start attaching to it. Questions appear automatically. Is he losing interest? Is someone else more important? Am I misreading this connection? None of these questions existed before. They weren't necessary. They only emerge when there's something to lose. The same behavior that once passed unnoticed now feels like data. Everything becomes information. Everything is interpreted. I begin observing him instead of enjoying him. When plans change, I don't just adapt. I analyze. When his energy shifts, I don't just notice. I evaluate. When he pulls back slightly, I don't give space. I feel destabilized. From my side, this feels like attentiveness, like emotional intelligence, like awareness. From his side, it feels like pressure. This is where the relationship crosses a critical line. Before, being with me felt light. Conversations flowed without consequence. Time together felt restorative rather than demanding. He didn't feel watched. He didn't feel measured. Now there's an atmosphere. Not overt tension, not conflict. Something subtler. A sense that his actions are being tracked, that his words carry implications, that mistakes will be remembered. Men feel this immediately, even if they can't articulate it. High-value men especially. Men who have options are sensitive to emotional cost. They pay attention to how they feel after interactions. Energized or drained. Relaxed or tense. Free or constrained. When emotional investment increases without awareness, I unknowingly turn myself into a source of friction. I ask more questions, but they're not curious. They're clarifying. I express concerns, but they're not about connection. They're about reassurance. I communicate needs, but they're rooted in anxiety, not mutual understanding. And slowly, the dynamic changes. I start needing more from him than he ever agreed to provide. His attention begins to regulate my emotional state. His consistency begins to determine my sense of security. His choices begin to feel like commentary on my worth. That's a heavy role for anyone to carry, especially a man who didn't sign up to manage someone else's inner world. The man who once showed up freely now feels like he's being audited. The man who once chose me easily now feels like he's under review. And here's the part most people don't want to admit. The man didn't change first. I did. My expectations rose quietly. My tolerance narrowed subtly. My reactions intensified without warning. What used to feel like flexibility now feels like standards. What used to feel like confidence now feels like vigilance. I tell myself this is normal. That caring more naturally means expecting more. That deeper connection requires more effort. But effort isn't the problem. Pressure is. Effort invites. Pressure constrains. When effort is appreciated, it grows. When effort is expected, it resents. This is where men begin to pull back, not out of disinterest, but out of self-preservation. They sense that the relationship is becoming conditional, that ease is being replaced with obligation, that affection is now tied to performance. And men who respect themselves don't stay where their presence is no longer enough. They don't argue about it. They don't explain it in detail. They simply reduce investment. From the outside, this looks like emotional distance. From the inside, it's a response to increased cost. The irony is that my fear of losing him is what creates the conditions that make losing him likely. I start trying to secure outcomes instead of allowing them. I try to control uncertainty instead of tolerating it. I try to prevent pain instead of risking connection. And in doing so, I replace attraction with management. The man who was drawn to my emotional steadiness now experiences emotional weight. The woman who once felt grounding now feels demanding. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It happens incrementally. One extra reaction, one unspoken expectation, one disappointed look where there used to be understanding. None of it seems dramatic on its own, but together they change the emotional climate. The relationship stops being a place he wants to return to and becomes a place he has to prepare for. Men with options notice when being with someone starts to feel like work. Not productive work, emotional labor. They notice when peace is replaced with vigilance, when connection is replaced with maintenance. And when they notice this pattern early, they don't try to fix it. They disengage before attachment deepens. This is why so many women feel confused when men pull away right as things seem to be getting serious. From her perspective, she was investing more. From his perspective, she was becoming harder to be with. He doesn't leave because she wants commitment. He leaves because commitment now looks like pressure without reward. This is the moment where attraction quietly begins to die. Not because of a fight, not because of betrayal, not because of incompatibility, but because the emotional cost of staying starts outweighing the emotional benefit. And the most painful part is that the very qualities that created attraction in the beginning are the ones most likely to disappear as emotional investment grows. Ease turns into expectation. Warmth turns into monitoring. Confidence turns into fear. Unless this shift is recognized consciously, it becomes automatic. Every future relationship follows the same arc. Every man who matters triggers the same behavior. Every connection collapses under the same invisible weight. This is not because the men were wrong. It's because unmanaged investment quietly transforms behavior in ways that attraction cannot survive. Once emotional investment has shifted my behavior, it doesn't stop at pressure. It evolves into something more active, something more deliberate, even if I don't consciously choose it. Testing. At first, the tests are small, almost harmless, easy to justify. I send a message and notice how long it takes him to respond. I suggest plans and watch how quickly he commits. I mention another man casually and observe his reaction. I tell myself I'm just paying attention, that I'm learning about him, that I'm being smart. But these interactions are no longer neutral. They're not about connection. They're about information gathering. Every moment becomes a checkpoint. Does he care enough? Is he invested enough? Is he choosing me enough? What I don't realize is that every test is also a consequence. Because the moment I decide to measure him, I've already changed the rules of the relationship. When we first met, there were no exams, no evaluations, no hidden scoring system. Being together was simple. Enjoyment was the point. Effort was voluntary. Now effort is observed. If he responds quickly, I relax. If he doesn't, I feel uneasy. If he shows enthusiasm, I feel secure. If he doesn't, I withdraw. From my side, this feels reactive, emotional, natural. From his side, it feels conditional. He starts sensing that his behavior determines my emotional availability, that affection is something he earns or loses based on performance. that being with me now requires navigating unspoken rules. And here's the truth that's uncomfortable to face. Every test I create is a punishment for his success in attracting me. Because before I liked him, none of this existed. Before he mattered, he was free. Now that he matters, he's monitored. I don't say this out loud, but the message underneath my behavior is clear. Because I like you, I'm going to make this harder than it was before. This is the opposite of how attraction works. Men don't bond through increased difficulty. They don't commit through emotional obstacles. They don't deepen connection by passing surprise evaluations. They bond when they feel chosen freely, when effort is welcomed, not inspected, when presence feels sufficient. Testing turns the relationship into a proving ground, and the tests themselves are rarely fair. They aren't designed to understand him. They're designed to soothe my anxiety. I test because I don't trust uncertainty. I test because I want guarantees. I test because I'm afraid of being wrong about him. But fear-driven tests don't reveal character. They reveal insecurity. And high-value men recognize this quickly. Men with experience have seen these patterns before. They know what comes next. They know that tests don't stop once they're passed. They escalate. What starts as curiosity becomes expectation. What starts as observation becomes entitlement. What starts as just checking becomes control. So they respond by reducing investment. Not dramatically, not angrily, quietly. They stop initiating as much. They take longer to respond. They keep more emotional distance. From my perspective, this feels like confirmation that something is wrong. So I test more, and the cycle tightens. One of the most damaging aspects of testing behavior is that it changes the emotional tone of every interaction. Conversations stop being spontaneous. They become strategic. I ask questions with hidden motives. I listen for reassurance instead of understanding. I interpret neutral behavior as meaningful. And because the tests are unspoken, he never knows what he's being graded on. He just knows that something shifted. He feels it in the way I respond, in the way my tone changes, in the way warmth appears and disappears. This creates a sense of instability, not dramatic instability, subtle unpredictability, the kind that makes a man cautious. He doesn't know what version of me he's going to get. He doesn't know what behavior will be rewarded or punished. He doesn't know what expectation he unknowingly violated. And men who value peace don't stay long in environments like that. Here's the irony. I believe testing will help me determine whether he's worthy of my feelings. But testing does the opposite. It demonstrates that I don't trust my own judgment, that I need constant reassurance, that my emotional state is fragile. And nothing erodes attraction faster than emotional fragility disguised as evaluation. From his perspective, the woman he was drawn to is being replaced by someone who turns every interaction into a measure of commitment. He feels like he's on trial. And trials don't create intimacy. They create distance. There's another layer to this that's even more destructive. Testing behavior often rewrites history. When I was less invested, his behavior felt fine. When I'm more invested, the same behavior feels insufficient. Nothing changed except my expectations. But instead of recognizing that shift, I frame it as his failure. He's not consistent enough. He's not expressive enough. He's not showing up the way I need. The truth is simpler. He's the same man. I'm just relating to him differently. And because the tests are rooted in anxiety, they're designed to detect danger, not compatibility. So even when he shows up, it's never enough. Even when he reassures, it doesn't last. Even when he passes one test, another appears. This is exhausting for him. No matter how capable, confident, or grounded a man is, no one wants to feel like they're constantly being assessed. Especially not by someone who once felt easy to be around. High-value men don't fight these dynamics. They recognize them. They understand that a relationship built on testing will only grow more restrictive over time. So they withdraw before attachment deepens. And from the outside, it looks confusing. He was so interested. Things were going so well. It felt like we were getting closer, but internally, the relationship had already crossed a threshold. Enjoyment had been replaced with evaluation. Ease had been replaced with pressure. Freedom had been replaced with consequence. Testing doesn't secure commitment. It signals that commitment will come with increasing emotional cost. And men who have choices don't commit to environments where the price keeps rising. Unless this pattern is seen clearly, it becomes automatic. Every time I care, I test. Every time I test, I apply pressure. Every time I apply pressure, attraction erodes. Not because I wanted to push him away, but because fear quietly took control of my behavior. As testing becomes a regular part of the dynamic, it evolves into something even more destructive. The tests stop being subtle. They stop being observational. They become traps. Situations where there is no correct answer. I don't frame them that way consciously. I tell myself I'm just asking questions, just being honest, just expressing curiosity. But underneath the goal is no longer understanding. It's validation. One of the most common traps looks harmless on the surface. I ask him what he thinks about one of my friends. Or I ask if he finds someone else attractive. Or I bring up another woman casually and watch his face. If he answers honestly and says yes, I feel threatened. I read it as disloyalty. I wonder why he's even noticing other women. I tell myself a man who truly cares wouldn't think that way. If he says no, I don't relax. I assume he's lying, or trying to protect my feelings, or hiding something. I tell myself a man who truly cares would be more transparent. No matter how he answers, my anxiety is confirmed. This is what makes these tests so damaging. They are not designed to learn the truth. They are designed to reinforce fear. I create scenarios where any response supports the story I'm already telling myself. He can't be trusted. He's not fully committed. He's not choosing me the way I need. From my perspective, this feels like intuition, like emotional intelligence, like being perceptive. In reality, it's projection. I'm not responding to who he is. I'm responding to my fear of losing him. And the more I care, the more frequently these traps appear. I ask questions that carry emotional consequences. I bring up topics that test reassurance. I create moments that force him to prove loyalty. What I don't see is that every trap communicates the same message. I don't trust you. I don't feel secure with you. You are one wrong answer away from punishment. Men feel this immediately. Even if they can't explain it, they feel the pressure of walking through a minefield. They sense that honesty is dangerous, that transparency might backfire, that being themselves carries risk. So they become guarded. They choose words carefully. They hold back opinions. They soften truths. And when a man starts filtering himself to avoid emotional fallout, intimacy is already dying. These no-win tests also expose something deeper. They show that I'm no longer relating to him as an individual. I'm relating to a role, the role of the man who must make me feel secure. Once he occupies that role, Everything he does is evaluated through that lens. Neutral behavior becomes suspicious. Normal autonomy becomes threatening. Human imperfection becomes evidence of failure. And because the standards are emotional rather than logical, they shift constantly. What reassured me last week isn't enough this week. What felt safe yesterday feels uncertain today. What passed one test creates the expectation for the next. From his perspective, the rules are invisible and unstable. He doesn't know what standard he's being measured against. He doesn't know when he crossed a line. He doesn't know what behavior will suddenly become a problem. Living under that uncertainty is exhausting. No matter how much potential a man has, no matter how attracted he is, no one thrives in a relationship where they're constantly one misstep away from emotional consequence. And this is where attraction begins to decay quietly. Because attraction requires freedom, freedom to speak honestly, freedom to exist without constant judgment, freedom to be human. Testing removes that freedom. I believe I'm protecting myself. I believe I'm ensuring commitment. I believe I'm being careful. But what I'm actually doing is signaling that being with me requires vigilance. High-value men don't argue with this signal. They don't try to prove themselves indefinitely. They disengage. Not dramatically, not angrily. They stop offering depth where depth is punished. They stop sharing openly where honesty creates problems. They stop investing emotionally where security is never achieved. From my side, this looks like emotional withdrawal. From his side, it's self-respect. The most painful part is that these traps are invisible to the person creating them. I don't see myself as unfair. I see myself as sensitive. I don't see manipulation. I see caution. But sensitivity without self-awareness becomes control, and caution without trust becomes sabotage. Every no-win test teaches him the same lesson: that being close to me is dangerous, that honesty is risky, that effort is never enough. Eventually, he stops trying to answer correctly. He realizes there is no correct answer. At that point, one of two things happens. Either he emotionally detaches and stays physically present, offering less and less of himself, or he leaves. Not because he didn't care, but because caring placed him in a position where he was constantly set up to fail. These traps don't reveal his character. They reveal my inability to tolerate uncertainty. And uncertainty is unavoidable in real connection. No amount of testing creates certainty. No amount of reassurance removes risk. No amount of control produces security. It only produces distance. The moment a relationship becomes a series of exams instead of a shared experience, attraction shifts into obligation. And obligation is not what makes men stay. Testing feels like protection, but in reality, it is punishment disguised as caution. And men who recognize that pattern choose to remove themselves rather than live inside it. When testing no longer delivers the reassurance I'm looking for, the dynamic often escalates into something louder, more emotional, more volatile. This is where artificial drama enters the relationship. It doesn't begin as chaos. It begins as intensity. When I'm with a man I don't care about deeply, my emotions stay level. His actions don't reach into me. There's no urgency, no fear, no spike. But when I care, everything feels amplified. The highs feel higher, the lows feel heavier. The connection feels more alive. I tell myself this is passion, that this emotional charge means something real is happening, that depth requires intensity. What I don't realize is that I'm confusing stimulation with connection. The pattern usually follows the same rhythm. Things are going well. I start to feel secure. Calm settles in, and instead of allowing that calm to deepen something in me, becomes uneasy. Calm feels unfamiliar. Stability feels fragile. Peace feels temporary. So unconsciously, I disrupt it. I pick at something small. I bring up an issue that doesn't need to exist. I withdraw affection slightly and wait to see if he notices. These moments are not random. They serve a purpose. They create emotional movement. When he reacts, when he reassures, when he tries to restore harmony, I feel validated. His effort proves that I matter. His response confirms his investment. From my perspective, this feels like closeness. From his perspective, it feels like instability. What I experience as emotional depth, he experiences as unnecessary turbulence. The fights don't feel productive. The tension doesn't feel meaningful. The reconciliation doesn't feel earned. It feels manufactured. And manufactured intensity is exhausting. Men don't bond through emotional whiplash. They don't feel closer through repeated conflict. They don't interpret chaos as passion. They interpret it as a warning. Because men understand something instinctively. If emotional volatility appears early, it increases over time. What starts as occasional drama becomes a pattern. What starts as insecurity becomes control. What starts as emotional swings becomes instability. Men who have experience recognize this trajectory quickly. They see that the woman who creates drama to feel desired will continue creating drama to maintain that feeling. And no amount of attraction compensates for long-term emotional instability. Another way this drama shows up is through strategic withdrawal. I become cold when I feel slighted. I reduce affection to provoke pursuit. I create distance to see if he'll chase. Again, this isn't conscious manipulation. It's emotional conditioning. I want proof that I matter. If he pursues, I feel safe. If he doesn't, I feel rejected. But what he feels is confusion. Yesterday, warmth was present. Today, it's gone. Nothing changed on his end. This inconsistency trains him to associate closeness with risk. He learns that peace can disappear without warning, that emotional safety is unstable, that his effort may never be enough to maintain harmony. Over time, he stops leaning in, not because he doesn't care, but because caring costs too much. What I call passion, he calls emotional labor. He becomes responsible for managing not just his actions, but my emotional reactions to them. And that's a burden most men will not carry indefinitely, especially men who value autonomy and internal stability. There's another layer to this pattern that's easy to miss. The drama isn't just about testing him, it's about regulating myself. When I feel uncertain, drama gives me something to focus on. When I feel anxious, conflict gives me intensity. When I feel insecure, emotional swings make me feel alive. But using someone else to regulate my emotions is unsustainable. It turns the relationship into a coping mechanism rather than a partnership. From his side, the message becomes clear. Being with me means emotional unpredictability. Being close to me means managing turbulence. Being committed to me means sacrificing peace. And men with options don't choose relationships that complicate their lives no matter how attracted they are. They choose the woman who enhances their life, not the one who destabilizes it. This is where many women become confused. They believe the drama proves depth. They believe the intensity proves connection. They believe the emotional charge means love. But love does not require chaos. Connection does not require conflict. Attraction does not require instability. In fact, the opposite is true. The more emotionally stable a woman remains, as her investment increases, the safer and more drawn in a man feels. But when investment triggers volatility, attraction erodes. Men don't say this directly. They feel it. They feel drained after interactions. They feel cautious instead of excited. They feel relief when they have space. That relief is the beginning of the end. The woman who once made him feel grounded now makes him feel tense. And no man stays where tension outweighs pleasure. The tragedy is that the woman creating the drama believes she's deepening the bond. She doesn't see that she's teaching him that peace isn't possible with her. And once a man believes that, he starts planning his exit. Not because he hates her, not because he lacks feelings, but because long-term commitment to emotional chaos feels like self-betrayal. Artificial drama feels like proof of love to the insecure mind. But to a grounded man, it feels like a warning sign. And warnings are meant to be heeded. As emotional volatility becomes normalized, another pattern quietly takes over. One that feels reasonable on the surface, even justified. The slow construction of impossible standards. The more I care about a man, the more I imagine what the relationship could be. Not what it is, what it could become. And once that imagined future exists, I start measuring the present against it. This is where disappointment is born. Not from betrayal, not from neglect, but from the gap between reality and expectation. I don't tell myself I'm being unrealistic. I tell myself I'm being intentional, that I know what I want, that I'm holding standards. But standards rooted in fantasy don't guide relationships. They strain them. I begin comparing him to other men. Not directly, not out loud, but internally. I remember how a past partner communicated more emotionally, how another planned dates more creatively, how someone else expressed affection more frequently. I don't account for the full reality of those relationships. Only fragments, highlights, selective memories. I also compare us to what I see online. Carefully curated moments, romantic gestures stripped of context, relationships presented without conflict, fatigue, or complexity. And slowly, without realizing it, I compare him to an ideal that no real person can sustain. But the most destructive comparison is not to other men. It's to his potential. I don't get upset with who he is. I get upset with who I believe he could be. I know he could communicate better. I know he could be more expressive. I know he could try harder if he wanted to. So when he doesn't meet that imagined version, I feel disappointed. And that disappointment leaks into my behavior. My appreciation fades. My tone sharpens. My patience thins. From my perspective, I'm encouraging growth. From his perspective, he's being punished for not living up to an invisible standard. This is where I stop relating to him as a partner and start treating him like a project. I see areas to improve. I see gaps to fix. I see behaviors to adjust. And while growth is healthy, conditional acceptance is not. No one thrives when they feel like they're always falling short. He feels my dissatisfaction even when I don't express it directly. He senses my frustration even when I try to hide it. He notices that what he does is no longer enough. And because I've built these expectations internally, he never knows what standard he's being judged against. He just knows that something is missing. This creates a specific kind of emotional fatigue. The fatigue of never quite measuring up. The fatigue of trying without feeling successful. The fatigue of effort that isn't met with appreciation. Over time, this fatigue erodes motivation. He stops trying as hard. He stops offering as much. He stops engaging deeply. From my side, this looks like withdrawal. From his side, it's resignation. Another layer of this pattern is entitlement disguised as intimacy. The more invested I feel, the more I believe I deserve certain behaviors. More attention, more reassurance, more accommodation. I don't ask for these things clearly. I expect them. And when expectations aren't met, disappointment follows. But expectations that were never agreed upon feel unfair to the person being held to them. He doesn't know when the rules changed. He doesn't know what he consented to. He doesn't know why his effort no longer satisfies. So he begins to disengage emotionally to protect himself. This is when the relationship starts feeling heavy to him, not because he doesn't care, not because he doesn't, but because caring no longer feels rewarding. When appreciation turns into evaluation, something fundamental breaks. Gratitude becomes entitlement. Desire becomes demand. Partnership becomes performance review. And no man wants to audition for love indefinitely. Especially not a man who has other options. Men commit when they feel valued for who they are, not pressured for who they could become. They invest when their effort is received with appreciation, not treated as a baseline requirement. When a man feels like nothing he does is enough, he eventually stops trying to be enough. He either emotionally detaches and stays out of habit, or he leaves and finds someone who experiences his presence as a gift rather than a checklist. From the outside, this departure often looks sudden. He just changed. He stopped trying. He became distant. But the distance began much earlier. It began the moment appreciation was replaced with expectation. The moment acceptance was replaced with comparison. The moment love was replaced with evaluation. The tragedy is that the woman creating these standards believes she's building a better relationship. She believes she's refining, improving, elevating. But what she's actually doing is communicating dissatisfaction. And dissatisfaction is corrosive. It doesn't motivate men to rise. It teaches them that their best will never be enough. Over time, the relationship loses warmth. Conversations feel transactional. Affection feels conditional. Connection feels strained. The man who once felt chosen now feels judged. And men don't stay where they feel perpetually insufficient. Impossible standards don't create better partners. They create distance, resentment, and eventual disengagement. And unless this pattern is recognized, it repeats with every man who matters. Each new relationship becomes another opportunity to project ideals onto a human being, and each time the result is the same. The man leaves not because he lacked potential, but because the weight of expectations made staying untenable. When impossible standards fail to create the security I'm seeking, the dynamic often shifts again. This time into something quieter, more subtle, and far more damaging. Intermittent reinforcement. I don't announce it. I don't plan it. It emerges naturally from emotional insecurity. When he behaves in ways that soothe my anxiety, I'm warm, affectionate, open. When he doesn't, I become distant, cold, withholding. From my perspective, this feels reactive, emotional, honest. From his perspective, it feels conditional. His access to closeness now depends on my emotional state. His sense of safety depends on his ability to anticipate my reactions. His confidence depends on avoiding invisible mistakes. This is how affection quietly becomes a reward system. When he texts quickly, I soften. When he takes longer, I pull back. When he prioritizes me, I'm loving. When he prioritizes something else, I become irritable. I don't say, "You're being punished," but the pattern is clear. Love is available when he behaves correctly. Distance appears when he doesn't. This creates a powerful psychological effect. It conditions behavior. He starts adjusting himself to maintain emotional stability. He becomes hyper-aware of timing, tone, and availability. He begins editing his behavior to avoid triggering my withdrawal. At first, this might look like increased effort. He texts more consistently. He reassures more frequently. He sacrifices more of himself to maintain harmony. And I mistake this for commitment. But what's actually happening is erosion. His authenticity begins to disappear. His independence shrinks. His confidence weakens. He's no longer choosing me freely. He's complying to avoid emotional consequences. This is not bonding. It's conditioning. And conditioning destroys attraction. The man I was drawn to at the beginning didn't need my approval. He had his own internal stability. He showed up confidently, without fear of emotional punishment. The man I'm shaping through intermittent reinforcement becomes anxious. He starts walking on eggshells. He suppresses parts of himself. He prioritizes my emotional reactions over his own judgment. And while this might temporarily soothe my insecurity, it kills desire. Confidence fades when approval becomes necessary. Masculine grounding erodes under constant emotional surveillance. I don't see this happening in real time. I tell myself I'm responding to his behavior, that I'm teaching him how to treat me, that I'm enforcing boundaries. But boundaries are clear and consistent. Intermittent reinforcement is not. Boundaries don't change daily. They aren't tied to mood. They aren't enforced through emotional withdrawal. What I'm doing isn't boundary setting. It's emotional leverage. And leverage creates resentment. Even when he complies, resentment builds quietly. He may not express it. He may not confront me. But it accumulates. He starts feeling controlled. He starts feeling diminished. He starts disliking the version of himself he's becoming. This resentment has only two outcomes. Either he internalizes it and becomes passive detached and emotionally distant, or he reaches a breaking point and leaves, often without warning. From my side, this feels sudden. From his side, it feels inevitable. There's another critical mistake embedded in intermittent reinforcement. The behaviors I reward and punish are rarely about values or compatibility. They're about my emotional regulation. I reward behavior that soothes me. I punish behavior that triggers me. But what triggers me isn't necessarily wrong behavior. It's often normal autonomy. Him having a full life. Him needing space. Him not centering me constantly. By punishing these things, I teach him that authenticity costs connection, that being himself risks withdrawal. Over time, he either shrinks or rebels, and neither outcome leads to lasting intimacy. The irony is brutal. I'm trying to secure his attachment, but I'm teaching him that being attached to me requires self-betrayal. Men don't stay where they must diminish themselves to maintain peace. Even if they stay temporarily, attraction dies. What remains is obligation, and obligation is not sustainable. Intermittent reinforcement also destabilizes the emotional environment. He never knows which version of me he'll encounter, warm or cold, open or distant, affectionate or withdrawn. This unpredictability creates anxiety, not excitement. Anxiety does not deepen connection. It erodes trust. Trust requires consistency. When affection appears and disappears without explanation, it teaches him that emotional safety is fragile. And men who value stability don't build futures in unstable environments. At some point, he stops trying to get it right. He realizes there is no stable version of success. What pleased me yesterday may not please me today. What reassured me last week may not reassure me now. So he disengages emotionally, not out of cruelty, not out of indifference, out of exhaustion. And here's the most painful part. The man who leaves after experiencing this dynamic often regains his confidence quickly. He returns to himself. He remembers what it felt like to be relaxed, to be authentic, to be appreciated without condition. And when he finds a woman who offers consistency instead of control, commitment feels easy. Meanwhile, the woman who relied on intermittent reinforcement is left confused. She believes she invested. She believes she cared. She believes she tried. She doesn't see that her attempts at security trained him to detach. Intermittent reinforcement feels powerful in the short term. It gives the illusion of influence. It creates compliance. It temporarily reduces anxiety. But long-term, it destroys attraction, trust, and respect. Love does not thrive under emotional conditioning. It thrives under consistency, appreciation, and freedom. And unless this pattern is recognized, it quietly sabotages every relationship that matters. As intermittent reinforcement becomes familiar, another pattern locks into place. One that feels logical from the inside, but deeply corrosive from the outside. The double standard. I begin judging the same behavior differently, depending on how much I care about the man doing it. When a man I'm indifferent to behaves a certain way, I barely notice. When a man I'm invested in behaves the same way, it suddenly matters. If a casual man takes time to reply, I assume he's busy. If a man I want takes time to reply, I assume it means something about me. If a man I don't care about has female friends, it feels irrelevant. If a man I care about has female friends, it feels threatening. The behavior doesn't change. My emotional investment does. And instead of recognizing that my reaction is driven by fear, I frame it as discernment. I tell myself I'm holding him to a higher standard because he matters more. That deeper connection requires stricter expectations. That seriousness justifies intensity. But from his perspective, the message is very different. It says, the more you matter to me, the less freedom you're allowed. This is where relationships begin to feel punishing to men. The closer he gets, the more rules appear. The more invested he becomes, the more scrutiny he receives. The more he chooses me, the more he's constrained. This emotional double standard reveals something crucial. I'm no longer operating from shared principles. I'm operating from fear. My feelings determine what's acceptable and what isn't, not boundaries we discussed, not agreements we made together. My internal emotional state. This creates an unstable moral landscape. What's okay today may be unacceptable tomorrow. What's forgiven once may be punished later. What felt harmless before now carries consequences. Men experience this as unfairness, not dramatic unfairness, psychological unfairness. They feel like they're being judged by criteria that shift based on my anxiety rather than their actions. And over time, this erodes trust. He can't rely on consistency. He can't predict reactions. He can't relax into the relationship. Instead of feeling chosen, he feels monitored. Instead of feeling appreciated, he feels evaluated. The double standard also exposes my lack of trust. By holding him to higher standards than everyone else, I'm admitting something I don't want to face. I don't trust his choice to be with me. I'm so afraid of losing him that I try to control outcomes instead of allowing choice. I monitor behavior. I apply pressure. I create consequences. But control does not create security. It creates resistance. The man who feels like he's constantly being restricted for caring will eventually ask himself a hard question. Why am I being punished for choosing her? That question is the beginning of detachment. Another layer of this pattern is how it reframes normal human behavior as personal threat. A man maintaining friendships becomes suspicious. A man protecting his time becomes selfish. A man asserting independence becomes emotionally distant. The closer I feel to him, the more I interpret autonomy as risk. But men do not experience love as the loss of self. They experience it as addition. When a relationship begins to feel like subtraction, they reassess. And men who have worked hard to build stable, fulfilling lives do not give that up for emotional volatility. No matter how strong the attraction, this is where the self-sabotage becomes complete. I'm trying to secure him by tightening control. But tightening control signals insecurity, and insecurity undermines attraction. The very behaviors designed to keep him close convince him that staying will cost him peace. The irony is painful. When I punish him for being attractive to other women, I'm punishing the qualities that drew me to him. When I test his commitment, I'm demonstrating that commitment with me requires constant proof. When I hold him to impossible standards, I'm showing him that his effort will never feel sufficient. Every attempt at security becomes a reason to leave. From his perspective, the relationship stops feeling like a partnership and starts feeling like a liability. He begins comparing, not to other women's beauty or charm, to other emotional environments. He remembers what it felt like to be appreciated without conditions, to be trusted without surveillance, to be respected without constant correction. And once that comparison is made, staying becomes harder. Men don't leave because they stop caring. They leave because they start losing respect for the dynamic. At some point, he realizes that no matter how much he gives, the standards will continue to rise. That peace will always be temporary. That approval will always be conditional. And then he makes a choice. He either stays and suppresses himself, or he leaves and restores his autonomy. Most men who value themselves choose the second option. From the outside, this looks like sudden withdrawal. From the inside, it's the end of a long internal negotiation. He didn't wake up and decide to walk away. He slowly accepted that the relationship demanded more sacrifice than it offered reward. The double standard ensures that the man who matters most is treated with the least grace. And unless this pattern is recognized, it repeats endlessly. Each new man is judged more harshly than the last. Each deeper connection brings more pressure. Each attempt at closeness increases emotional cost. Until the woman is left asking the same question again: why do the men I want always leave? The answer has been present all along. They weren't leaving because they didn't care. They were leaving because caring came with punishment. Here is the lesson most people only learn after years of disappointment. Security in relationships is not created by pressure. It is created by choice. The moment you try to control someone's commitment, you lose the very thing you're trying to protect. Love cannot survive where freedom is punished. Attraction cannot grow where peace is replaced by fear. And connection cannot deepen when one person is constantly being measured, tested, or managed. The most powerful relationships are not built on effort extracted through anxiety. They are built on appreciation freely given. When someone feels valued, they lean in. When they feel trusted, they stay. When they feel safe being themselves, commitment becomes natural instead of forced. This applies far beyond dating. It applies to how you lead, how you parent, how you maintain friendships, and how you treat yourself. The more you try to secure outcomes through control, the more resistance you create. The more you allow people to choose you without pressure, the more meaningful those choices become. Real confidence is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to tolerate uncertainty without becoming destructive. If this video made you uncomfortable, that's not a bad sign. Discomfort often means truth is present. Growth doesn't come from denial. It comes from seeing patterns clearly and deciding to interrupt them. If you've recognized yourself in any part of this, I'd like you to reflect honestly and share your thoughts in the comments. Where did this land for you? What did it bring up? And if you value this kind of calm, direct psychological insight, consider subscribing to the channel. We're here to understand patterns, not blame, to gain clarity, not comfort, because a life built on awareness is always more stable than one built on illusion.